I sweat through 70 hours a week to provide for my wife, Amanda. And she got pregnant by the town vet, Mark Thompson, right there in my bed, in the house I bought, while I was busting my back in Nebraska, closing a deal on a combine. But the worst part? She planned to let me raise that kid like some kind of fool, because, in her exact words to him, he won't do the math. And her parents, Reverend Paul and Linda, a preacher and a so-called pillar of morality, told her, let him believe it. Family image matters most. They didn't think I was smart enough to catch on. They forgot. I'm a Kansas farm boy. I'm not stupid. And this Thanksgiving, I'm turning their family dinner table into a court of justice. What about you? If it were you, would you stay quiet or expose everything? It was a crisp fall afternoon at the Willow Creek College tailgate. The air smelled like grilled burgers and spilled beer. I was leaning against my truck with a couple of buddies, wearing my favorite Wildcats jersey, when I noticed her, Amanda, standing with a group of friends near the tent across the lot. She kept glancing our way, tucking her hair behind her ear like she was trying to work up the nerve. A few minutes later, she started walking over, holding a red Solo cup. Then, bam, she accidentally bumped into me, sending a wave of cold beer straight down my jersey. She gasped, hand to her mouth, eyes wide. "Oh my God, I'm so sorry," she stammered. I just laughed, brushing at the wet spot. "Guess you owe me dinner now," I said, half joking. She blushed so hard she looked like she'd been sitting by the grill. That little slip-up, planned or not, was the first spark. And right there, in the middle of the noise and the crowd, I knew I'd remember her face for a long time. After that, numbers were exchanged, hers saved in my phone as Amanda Beer Jersey. We started texting that night, and within a week we were meeting up after classes. Our dates weren't fancy. A couple of burgers from the diner, a drive out to the edge of town, windows down, the night air carrying the smell of cut hay. We'd park by the fence line, climb into the bed of my truck, and watch the stars scatter across the Kansas sky. She'd bring a blanket, I'd bring a thermos of coffee, and we'd just talk. About school, about music, about nothing and everything. Those quiet nights felt bigger than the stadium crowd the day we met. Somewhere between the laughter and the silence, I found myself looking forward to her voice more than anything else. And in those moments, I started thinking maybe she could be the one I'd build something real with. One night under that same sky, the conversation got heavier. I told her about losing my dad when I was 15, how a heart attack took him quick, and how that left me helping Mom keep our family farm afloat. How the smell of diesel and hay wasn't just work, it was survival. She listened without interrupting, eyes locked on mine like every word mattered. Then she told me about her parents, Reverend Paul and Linda, strict Baptists who believed in rules over reasons. How she'd grown up under the microscope of a congregation where even her friends were chosen for her. She said I was different from the guys they wanted her to date. "You feel real," she whispered. For a moment, it felt like two completely different worlds had met in the back of that truck, and neither of us wanted to leave. 2 years later, I took her to her favorite spot, a quiet stretch of Willow Lake just outside town. It was late spring, the water glassy under the setting sun. I had a ring box in my pocket so heavy it felt like it was burning through my jeans. We walked along the shore until I stopped, heart pounding harder than the day I ran my first harvest alone. I told her she was my best friend, the only person I wanted beside me through every drought, every storm. Then I dropped to one knee, opened the box, and asked, "Amanda, will you marry me?" Her hands flew to her mouth, eyes filling with tears. She nodded before she could even speak. "Yes," she finally whispered. Later that night, she curled into me and said, "I can't wait to have your kids someday." I believed her. God help me. I believed every word. The first year of marriage felt like stepping into the life I'd been working toward since I was a teenager. I put in the hours, more than 70 a week, expanding the farm from 40 acres to 60, upgrading equipment, and landing a couple of strong contracts with local buyers. By the end of that year, the numbers were better than I dared to hope, just shy of $300,000 in revenue. Every cent was earned the hard way, sweat on my back, dirt under my nails. Amanda would talk about how proud she was, how we were finally living the dream, and I believed we were. I thought we were building something solid together, a home, a family, a future. Back then, I would have done anything to make her happy. Anything. But Amanda's idea of the dream wasn't exactly the same as mine. One night over dinner, she said she wanted rustic luxury. I laughed, thinking she was joking, until she pulled out a Pinterest board full of polished wood beams, stone fireplaces, and high-end designer furniture that looked like it belonged in a country club, not a farm. She wanted the charm of the countryside, without any of the rough edges. I didn't get it, but I told myself marriage was about compromise. So I said yes. Yes to the remodels, the designer touches, the imported fixtures. Yes to the kind of rustic you only see in glossy magazines, even if it meant working longer hours to pay for it. The first big-ticket must-have was a purebred thoroughbred mare, a show horse, not a workhorse, price tag 6 figures, I'd grown up around livestock my whole life, but I'd never written a check that big for an animal. Amanda said it was an investment, something that would add class to the property. Truth was, the mare barely left the pasture. She stood there, gleaming in the sun, eating feed that cost more per month than my truck payment. Special hay, supplements, a private trainer who came out twice a week, all that money, all that care, for a horse that existed to look good in photos. Next came the Brahman cattle. To me, cattle were about function, beef or breeding, but Amanda thought our Herefords looked too basic. She'd seen a photo spread in some lifestyle magazine with these massive humpbacked Brahmans grazing against a sunset and decided we needed them. I tried to explain they were more expensive to maintain and not ideal for our climate, but it was like talking to a fence post. A few weeks later, a trailer rolled up with 3 Brahman heifers inside, each tagged with a price that made my stomach tighten. They were beautiful animals, sure, but beauty doesn't pay the feed bills. Then came the trucks. I've always taken care of my vehicles, run them until the wheels practically fall off. Amanda, though, decided we needed a brand new diesel pickup every year. Last year's model already feels outdated, she'd say, like she was talking about a phone, not a $60,000 machine. So every spring, we'd trade in a perfectly good truck for the latest and greatest. Leather seats, custom wheels, touchscreen bigger than my laptop. I told myself it was fine. It kept her happy, and I could afford it. But looking back, those shiny purchases were the first cracks in the foundation. I just didn't see them yet. When we got married, Amanda had talked about wanting kids someday, and I took her at her word. But about a year in, every time I brought it up, she'd find a reason to push it off. We're still settling in, or I want to travel a bit first, or let's just enjoy being married. I didn't want to pressure her. Raising a child isn't something you rush. Still, I'd see her scrolling through photos of friends' babies on social media, smiling, then quickly locking her phone. I chalked it up to timing, told myself we were on the same page. But somewhere in the back of my mind, a quiet voice was starting to whisper that maybe she didn't want the same future we'd talked about by the lake. It started with a weekend here and there. Amanda would pack a small suitcase, hug me goodbye, and say she was headed out with the girls. Shopping trips, wine tastings, spa weekends. I didn't think much of it. I figured everyone needs their space. But the trips got longer, more frequent. Sometimes she'd leave just as I was heading out of state for farm business. Perfect timing, she'd say with a wink. She always came back with stories, photos, little souvenirs. But looking at the pictures now, I realized they were always the same few friends, the same recycled smiles. And some weekends, there were no photos at all, just vague captions like "such a great time," with no proof of where she'd actually been. At home, Amanda seemed elsewhere. She'd sit on the couch scrolling her phone, half listening when I talked about the farm. She stopped joining me for evening walks around the property. We ate more meals in silence. Even when she was sitting next to me, it felt like there was a wall between us. I tried to bridge it. Date nights, little surprises, asking about her day. She'd smile, thank me, but the warmth wasn't there anymore. Nights ended with her heading to bed early, claiming headaches or exhaustion, and I'd find myself lying awake, staring at the ceiling, wondering when we'd gone from newlyweds to strangers sharing a house. Then, out of nowhere, I got a text from Sarah Miller, Amanda's best friend since high school. We'd never been close, our conversations were polite, surface level, but her message was short and urgent. We need to talk, not when Amanda's around. My first thought was maybe she was planning a surprise party or some kind of gift, but when I asked if it could wait, she replied, "No, it's important. You need to hear this in person." Something about the tone, sharp, almost desperate, made my stomach knot. We agreed to meet at a coffee shop 2 towns over. I didn't know it then, but that message was the first crack that would split my whole life open. I drove 30 miles out to a little coffee shop off the highway, a place where nobody from Willow Creek would stumble in. Sarah was already there, sitting in a corner booth with a paper cup between her hands. She didn't bother with small talk. No, "How are you?" No smile. Just a quick glance toward the door to make sure no one else had followed me. "Thanks for coming," she said, her voice low. I slid into the seat across from her, still thinking maybe this was about some business idea she'd mentioned once. But her eyes were sharper than I'd ever seen, scanning the room before locking on mine. "Jack, you need to see something." She reached down to the seat beside her, and that's when I noticed the thick manila folder, edges bent, stuffed with papers. My gut told me this wasn't about a party or a favor. This was about something I wasn't going to be able to unsee. She slid the folder across the table like it was radioactive. "Open it," she said. I flipped it open, expecting maybe a loan application or a proposal for that organic pet food business she'd talked about. Instead, the first thing I saw was a color photograph. Amanda, my wife, laughing in a hotel lobby, her hand on a man's chest. The next page, another photo, this time them kissing. Page after page, screenshots, receipts, printed text messages. My heartbeat was in my ears. The photos weren't fuzzy shadows from a distance. They were close, clear, undeniable. The timestamps were recent. I felt the air in the cafe grow heavy, like someone had turned down the oxygen. "It's all in order," Sarah said quietly. "Dates, times, everything you need to know." I closed my eyes for a second, gripping the edge of the table, trying to steady the shaking in my hands. I flipped to the next section of the folder, and there it was in black and white. Amanda was having an affair with Dr. Mark Thompson, our town's veterinarian. The same man who'd charged me $5,000 to treat one of Amanda's precious horses last year. The same man whose wife, Katie, taught Sunday school with Amanda's mother. In one photo, they were sitting across from each other in a booth at a diner, her hand resting on his. In another, he had his arm around her in the parking lot, their faces inches apart. There were even text messages between them, full of pet names and inside jokes, stuff you only say when you're deep into something you shouldn't be. Every word I read was another nail in the coffin of the life I thought I had. The evidence didn't stop at dinner dates. There were hotel receipts, Memphis, Oklahoma City, even one in Wichita, each tied to weekends Amanda had told me she was on girls' trips. I compared the dates in my head to the times I'd been out of state buying equipment or checking on suppliers. It lined up too perfectly. One weekend, she'd sworn she was at a spa retreat with Sarah and 2 other friends. Sarah looked at me and shook her head. "I was in Florida that weekend," she said flatly. The pit in my stomach grew heavier with every page. They'd planned it down to the hour, slipping in and out of towns where no one would recognize them, all while I was busting my back to pay for the roof over her head. Then came the part that twisted the knife. Mixed in with the photos and receipts were still frames from my own security cameras, timestamps matching the nights I'd been gone. There was Mark's truck pulling up my driveway 20 minutes after I left for a trip to Nebraska. 2 days later, the same truck leaving in the early morning light, Amanda walking him out, holding his hand. Another clip showed them unloading grocery bags together, like they were playing house in my home. I felt my jaw clench so hard it hurt. The evidence wasn't just circumstantial. It was visual, direct, and taken from my own front yard. I thought I'd reached my limit until I turned the page and saw a screenshot of a text from Amanda to Mark. My eyes locked on the words. "Your baby is making me sick today. Can't wait to tell him it's his, so he'll stop asking for kids." My chest tightened. I read it again, slower this time, just to be sure I hadn't imagined it. The casual cruelty in that line hit harder than all the photos combined. This wasn't just betrayal. It was a plan to let me raise another man's child, smiling in my face while she lied every single day. I set the paper down, staring at it, feeling something inside me go cold. That was the moment I knew. Whatever love I'd had for her had just been buried for good. I sat there in that cafe booth, staring at the text until the letters blurred. The truth slammed into me. Amanda wasn't just cheating. She was pregnant, and it wasn't mine. My mind jumped to the doctor's visit we'd had a few weeks earlier, when I'd gone with her because she'd been feeling sick. I'd held her hand in that sterile white room, thinking I was supporting my wife through something important. All the while she was sending selfies to Mark, complaining about "your baby making me sick." Every detail clicked into place: the sudden interest in saltines, the refusal to drink wine, the soft touches to her stomach when she thought I wasn't looking. She wasn't preparing to tell me the truth. She was laying the groundwork for the biggest lie of my life. And if Sarah hadn't stepped in, I might have been buying nursery furniture for another man's kid. When I finally looked up from the folder, Sarah was watching me closely. "There's more," she said. She scrolled through her phone, pulled up a set of screenshots, and slid it across the table. They were texts between Amanda and her mother, Linda. My blood ran cold as I read them. Amanda had confessed to her mom that Sarah knew about the affair, and Linda's response was immediate. "Don't worry, honey, your father will handle it." Sarah said Amanda's parents weren't just aware, they were active in covering for her. Reverend Paul, the man who shook my hand every Sunday, called me son at the dinner table, had been helping keep me in the dark. They weren't just protecting their daughter, they were protecting their image in the church. The next screenshot hit me like a hammer. It was a text from Reverend Paul to Amanda. "I believe the best course is to let him believe the child is his for now. Later, when things settle with Mark, you can file for divorce. Consider it penance for your choices." I read it twice, my jaw tightening with each word. This wasn't a man blindsided by his daughter's mistakes. This was a calculated plan to use me as a placeholder until her lover could leave his wife. A strategy to keep their perfect family reputation intact while I unknowingly raised another man's child. The hypocrisy was staggering. This man preached about truth and integrity every Sunday, and then turned around and orchestrated one of the most deceitful schemes I'd ever heard. I leaned back in my chair, folder still open in front of me, and felt something inside me go dark. It wasn't just Amanda. It wasn't just Mark. It was her whole family. People I'd trusted, welcomed into my life, prayed with, worked beside. Sunday dinners, holiday gatherings, moments I thought were genuine. They were all poisoned now. Every handshake from Reverend Paul, every "how are you, son," was a lie. Every smile from Linda was a mask. And Amanda, she'd been sleeping beside me every night, pretending we were building a future together, while her real future was being plotted in secret with her parents' blessing. I wasn't just betrayed by my wife. I'd been betrayed by the people who claimed to be my family. And that was a wound that went deeper than anything I'd seen in that folder. Two days after meeting with Sarah, I drove to Wichita and walked into the office of a divorce attorney named Marcus Reed. I'd picked him because he was 3 counties over, far enough that no one in Willow Creek would connect the dots. The man was sharp, all business. I laid the folder on his desk, and within minutes, his eyebrows were climbing higher with every page. "With this kind of evidence," he said, "we're in an excellent position." He explained the state's property laws, how Amanda would only get what she could prove she contributed to, and since she'd spent more than she earned, that wasn't much. And the paternity issue? Courts don't take kindly to that, Marcus said with a thin smile. I walked out of that office with a plan forming in my head and the first real sense of control I'd felt in days. The next step was securing my finances. I didn't want Amanda to have the chance to drain our accounts once she realized the jig was up. I quietly transferred the bulk of our liquid assets into accounts with my name only, making sure it was all above board legally. I left just enough in the joint account to keep her from noticing anything was off, paying the regular bills, covering her shopping trips, maintaining the illusion. Every click of the online banking app felt like moving pieces on a chessboard, positioning myself for the checkmate I knew was coming. The farm was my life's work, and I wasn't about to let it get dragged into her mess. Marcus advised me to pull together every deed, receipt, and record showing I'd purchased the land and equipment before the marriage. I spent hours in my office, digging through file cabinets, pulling tax documents, invoices, and bank statements. Every acre, every tractor, every head of cattle was accounted for. The more I gathered, the more I realized how much I stood to lose if I didn't act fast. This wasn't just about revenge anymore. It was about survival. Once the assets were secured, I turned back to the folder from Sarah. I went through every photo, video, and screenshot, cross-referencing dates with my travel receipts and bank statements. I highlighted overlaps, hotel stays booked while I was in another state, charges for jewelry I'd never seen, ATM withdrawals that matched their trips. I put everything in order, labeled and tabbed, until it read like the world's ugliest diary. When I was done, I had multiple copies, one for my lawyer, one for court, and one for me. The last one I intended to hand-deliver in front of an audience. That's when the idea hit me. Every Thanksgiving, Amanda's parents hosted a huge dinner after the church service. 40 people packed into their big polished dining room. Family, church elders, important townsfolk. It was their pride and joy, their yearly stage to show off the perfect family. What better place to reveal the truth? Not in some quiet, private meeting where they could spin the story, but right there, in front of everyone whose opinion they valued most. If they'd spent months keeping this secret, I'd spend one afternoon blowing it wide open. I called Marcus and told him my plan. He hesitated for about 5 seconds before saying, "If that's what you want, I know just the guy." That's how I got in touch with Derek, a process server who specialized in delivering bad news in public without losing his cool. We set the time for exactly 2 o'clock Thanksgiving Day, right when the meal would start and everyone would be seated. Derek promised he'd be there on the dot, envelopes in hand. As I hung up the phone, I felt a calm, steady certainty settle in. The stage was set. The players were in place. Now all I had to do was wait. In Willow Creek, Thanksgiving at Reverend Paul and Linda's house was more than just a holiday. It was a spectacle. After the big morning service at First Baptist, the inner circle of the congregation would pile into their sprawling colonial home, its white columns wrapped in garlands, the driveway lined with luxury cars. Inside, the dining table stretched almost the length of the room, covered in fine china and silver that only came out once a year. Every seat was filled with someone important: deacons, business owners, family from out of state. It was the one day of the year when Paul could show off his flock and his family in the same breath. This year, I planned to give them a show they'd never forget. About 40 people were expected, just enough to make the house feel crowded, but not so many that a raised voice wouldn't carry across the room. Amanda's brother and his family would be there, along with her grandmother from Wichita. Half the church elders were coming, plus their wives. A couple of special guests, too. A new doctor in town and his wife, and a real estate developer Paul was courting for a youth center project. And of course, Dr. Mark Thompson and his wife Katie. The fact they'd been invited at all made my jaw tighten. Paul and Linda had set them at the table like nothing was wrong. Perfect. The more eyes on what was about to happen, the better. A week before, I met Sarah at the diner 2 towns over. I slid her an envelope, half payment now, half later, and told her exactly what I needed. "Show up early. I said. "Act like everything's fine. Sit where you can see me, but don't draw attention." She nodded, calm as ever. "They still think I'm coming," she said. "Linda called yesterday to confirm." I told her to keep her phone charged. She raised an eyebrow. "You want me to do something?" "No," I said. "Just record. Trust me. You'll want to have this on video." She smiled then, just a little, like she knew this would be one for the history books. The hardest part was the waiting. For the 2 weeks leading up to Thanksgiving, I played my role to perfection, the hard-working, doting husband. I laughed at Amanda's stories, held her hand at church, even complimented her cooking. At home, I acted interested when she showed me baby name lists she'd just been browsing. Every smile, every nod, every "that's a great idea, honey" was a lie I wore like armor. She thought she had me exactly where she wanted me, completely in the dark, blissfully unaware. And that's exactly what I wanted her to think, because when the truth came out, I wanted it to hit her like a freight train. The day before Thanksgiving, the house smelled like cinnamon and pie crust. Amanda moved around the kitchen like she was starring in some holiday commercial, rolling out dough she'd bought from the bakery, transferring it into her own pie dishes so it looked homemade. She hummed along to Christmas music, her phone buzzing every few minutes with texts she'd pretend not to read. Every so often she'd call me in to taste test something, her eyes soft, like we were the picture-perfect couple. I played along, offering smiles and compliments, even stealing a quick kiss on her cheek. Inside, though, I was counting the hours until that mask would crumble in front of everyone she wanted to impress. Mid-afternoon, Amanda asked if I could pick up her dress from the dry cleaner for tomorrow. "Oh, and maybe grab some flowers for the centerpiece. Mom loves when we bring those." I nodded, grabbing the claim ticket and my keys. At the florist, I ordered the most expensive arrangement they had: white lilies, deep red roses, eucalyptus branches wrapped in silk ribbon, the kind of bouquet that turns heads. When the florist asked if I wanted to include a note, I smiled and shook my head. "No note. The flowers will speak for themselves." She didn't need to know they weren't meant for a celebration. They were meant for a funeral. Before heading home, I swung by the hardware store for a few farm supplies, which was really just a cover to stash what I needed. In the back seat of my truck sat a small overnight bag, 2 changes of clothes, a pair of boots, and a stack of cash. I tucked it under a blanket, just in case Amanda got curious. That bag was my escape plan. Once the storm hit tomorrow, I didn't plan on sticking around for the cleanup. I'd be gone before the last slice of turkey hit the table. That night, after dinner, I told Amanda I was heading out to check on one of the far fields, something about an irrigation issue I wanted to handle before the holiday. She kissed me goodbye, none the wiser. 60 miles later, I pulled into a roadside motel that smelled faintly of bleach and cigarette smoke. It wasn't much, just a bed, a shower, and a door that locked, but it was exactly what I needed. From here, I could come and go without anyone noticing. No unexpected drop-ins. No chance of Amanda tracking me down before the reveal. Lying in that motel bed, I couldn't help but laugh to myself. I felt like a kid on Christmas Eve, restless, wired, watching the clock. Only instead of waiting for presents, I was waiting to deliver one. Not wrapped in paper and ribbon, but in manila envelopes and undeniable proof. Tomorrow, in front of 40 witnesses, the people who had lied, cheated, and plotted against me were going to watch their world implode. And I wasn't just looking forward to it, I was savoring it, every minute. Thanksgiving morning, I put on my best suit, the one I usually reserved for weddings and funerals. Crisp white shirt, polished boots, tie knotted just right. Amanda stepped out of the bedroom in a brand new dress, a soft cream color that hugged her figure and, not so subtly, framed the slight curve of her stomach. She gave me a look like she was waiting for me to notice, to comment, to fall into whatever narrative she was building. I smiled, told her she looked beautiful, and held out her coat. On the surface, we looked like the perfect couple heading to a family holiday. Inside, I was already counting down the hours until that picture would shatter. The The sanctuary at First Baptist was packed, every pew filled with people in their Sunday best. The choir sang, the organ swelled, and then Reverend Paul stepped up to the pulpit. His voice carried through the room as he spoke about loyalty, trust, and the bonds that hold a family together. He leaned hard on words like honesty and faithfulness, his gaze sweeping the congregation. The irony was so thick, I could almost taste it. Around me, people nodded and murmured amen, completely unaware that the man preaching was the architect of one of the most deceitful plans I'd ever seen. At one point, Paul's eyes locked on mine. He paused, just for a beat, before continuing about how nothing stays hidden from the eyes of the Lord. I bit the inside of my cheek to keep from laughing out loud. I wondered if he could see it, the quiet knowledge sitting behind my smile. Did he sense that this might be the last Thanksgiving he'd give this sermon without people questioning every word? I kept my expression neutral, even nodding once, like I was taking his message to heart. In a way I was, just not the way he intended. After the service, the usual mingling began. Handshakes, hugs, quick conversations in the church lobby. Amanda chatted with her mother while I made the rounds, exchanging polite greetings. Then we headed to Paul and Linda's house, where the smell of roasted turkey and cinnamon hit the moment we walked in. Guests trickled in, filling the rooms with chatter and the clink of glasses filled with cider. Amanda floated from group to group, playing the role of glowing daughter and devoted wife. I stayed on the edges, smiling when spoken to, my phone heavy in my pocket. By 1:30, everyone had arrived. The dining table was set, the food laid out, and the small talk was in full swing. I slipped my phone out and checked the messages. Nothing yet. Then, at 1:55, it buzzed. A single text from Derek. In position. 5 minutes. My heart rate stayed steady, but my focus sharpened. I scanned the room, noting where everyone was sitting, making sure the key players were in clear view. Amanda was laughing at something her mother said, completely unaware that in less than 10 minutes, her world, and everyone else's, was about to flip upside down. At exactly 1:55 p.m., my phone buzzed again. Derek's message was short. 5 minutes. I slid the phone back into my pocket, my face giving away nothing. Around me, the chatter continued, silverware clinking, chairs sliding into place, Amanda's laugh carrying over the hum of conversation. I took a slow breath, feeling the calm before a storm only I knew was coming. This was the point of no return. In 5 minutes, the perfect family image they'd worked so hard to protect was going to implode, right here, in their own dining room. I clapped my hands lightly and raised my voice just enough to carry. "All right, folks. Let's get everyone to their seats so we can get started," I said with a friendly smile. People shuffled toward the table, checking the little name cards Amanda's mother had placed days earlier. I made sure Paul was at the head, Amanda to his right, Linda beside her, and, perfectly within view, Mark and Katie. Sarah sat near the middle, phone discreetly in her lap. I took my own seat beside Amanda, my chair angled just enough to see the front door. Paul stood at the head of the table, clearing his throat and spreading his arms like he was about to bless both the meal and the moment. "Before we begin this wonderful feast, I'd like to say a few words of thanks." That's when the doorbell rang. It was a clean, sharp sound that cut through the low murmur of the room. Linda started to rise, but Paul waved her down with a smile. "I'll get it," he said, still wearing his apron. He walked to the door, his voice carrying, "Sorry, we're just about to—" Then he stopped mid-sentence. From my seat, I could see Derek standing on the porch, professional, composed, 3 thick manila envelopes in hand. "I'm looking for Amanda Lawson," he said clearly. Paul's face froze, but he stepped aside. Derek handed Amanda the largest envelope, then turned to Paul and Linda. "And these are for Reverend Paul Lawson and Mrs. Linda Lawson." He placed the remaining 2 envelopes into their stunned hands. "You've been served. Have a nice day." Without another word, he turned and walked back down the steps. The room went dead silent. Chairs stopped moving. Forks hovered midair. Amanda stood holding the envelope like it might bite her. Paul clutched his, staring at the closed door. Linda looked down at hers, lips pressed thin. Slowly, heads began to turn, first toward Amanda, then toward me. I didn't flinch. I sat back, calm, meeting their eyes one by one. My heartbeat was steady, my breathing slow. If they were waiting for me to explain, I was more than ready to oblige. Amanda tore open the envelope, flipping to the first page. Her eyes darted across the words, her face draining of color. She glanced at me, her mouth opening but no sound coming out. The second page turned, and the flush crept up her neck, blotching her cheeks. The silence in the room felt heavy enough to crush bone. She knew exactly what those papers meant: divorce, adultery, paternity fraud, conspiracy. And she knew the evidence inside left no room for lies. In that moment, she looked smaller than I'd ever seen her, like the truth itself was pressing down on her shoulders. I took a deep breath and stood up slowly, making sure every eye was on me. "What you're holding," I began, voice steady, "is a petition for dissolution of marriage." I let the weight of the words settle in. Along with it is proof. Proof of adultery. Proof that the child Amanda is carrying isn't mine, and evidence of a conspiracy to deceive. I saw some jaws drop, others narrowing in anger. This isn't just about broken vows. It's about lies, betrayal, and deliberate fraud. I let that hang in the air before continuing. I didn't come here to humiliate anyone. I came to show the truth that's been hidden for too long. I pulled out my phone and tapped a few times. The room's silence deepened as the screen lit up, showing grainy hotel footage. There they were, Amanda and Mark, laughing, kissing, holding hands in a hotel hallway. The timestamp was clear. Just 2 months ago, when Amanda was supposed to be at a marketing conference in Cincinnati. Faces in the room paled. I turned the phone, letting everyone see the moment they left the hotel together, the way they moved like no one else existed. No denials could stand against what everyone was watching. Suddenly, a sharp voice cut through the room. Mark's wife, Katie, stood up, her face twisted in disbelief and rage. "What baby? What are you talking about?" she demanded, her voice cracking. The question hung in the air, heavy and explosive. Eyes darted between Amanda, Mark, and me. The tension was electric, like the whole house could ignite from the truth so thick it was suffocating. Katie's raw shock was a stark contrast to Amanda's pale silence and Mark's shifting gaze. Paul finally found his voice, though it was strained. "This is outrageous. How dare you come into my home and make these accusations?" he barked. I met his gaze without flinching. "These aren't accusations, Reverend," I said calmly. "They're documented facts. Page 12 has the texts where you told Amanda to be careful, discussing how to manage the pregnancy and cover it up." His face tightened, color draining as I laid the damning evidence on the table. "You preached about honesty and integrity every Sunday, yet here you are, orchestrating deception." The room was silent again, but this time it was charged, with anger, disbelief, and a bitter taste of betrayal. The room erupted into whispers, sharp, hurried, full of disbelief. Chairs scraped back as some guests exchanged glances, unable to process the sudden eruption of truth. A few shook their heads, murmuring about betrayal and scandal, while others quietly slipped toward the exit. The once warm, festive gathering was fracturing, unraveling with every whispered rumor. People who had smiled moments before now wore expressions of shock and discomfort. The air was thick with tension, as the community's polished image cracked and crumbled in front of their eyes. Katie Thompson, Mark's wife, suddenly snapped. Her eyes blazing with pain and rage, she grabbed a nearby gravy boat and hurled it across the room. The ceramic smashed against the wall near Mark's head, sending shards flying. "How could you?" she screamed, voice raw and trembling. Mark recoiled, hands raised defensively, but she wasn't done. Her tears flowed freely as she unleashed years of hurt and betrayal in a torrent of angry words. The room fell into stunned silence, every eye locked on the shattered pieces of what was once a picture-perfect family. Amanda's gaze locked onto Sarah, who was calmly recording every moment with her phone. There was a fire in Amanda's eyes, hatred, desperation, and something colder, darker. Her lips pressed into a thin line, and for a fleeting second, it felt like time stopped. The woman who had been my wife, the woman who'd woven lies for years, was now staring down the one person who had unraveled her carefully constructed facade. That look said it all: betrayal, fear, and a warning. But the truth had already been set free, and there was no going back. I stood up slowly, feeling every eye still glued to me, the room thick with tension and shattered trust. I looked around one last time and said, "Happy Thanksgiving, everyone." The words felt heavy, almost like a farewell to the family I once thought I had. Without waiting for a response, I turned and walked out of that dining room, past the stunned faces, the whispered curses, and the weight of all those broken promises. Each step away from that house felt lighter, like I was shedding years of pain and lies with every footfall. I didn't look back. I had no reason to. As I stepped outside and climbed into my truck, the chaos inside erupted behind me. Shouts and screams echoed through the open windows, the sound of broken chairs hitting the floor, voices raised in anger and despair. The door slammed shut, and I started the engine, the rumble of the diesel comforting after the storm inside. As I pulled out of the driveway and onto the highway, the shouting faded into the distance, replaced by the steady hum of the road ahead. Behind me was a town full of lies, but ahead lay a future built on truth, whatever that would be. That night, alone in a dingy motel room 60 miles from Willow Creek, I slept better than I had in months. No more lies, no more pretending, no more carrying the weight of a family built on deception. For the first time in a long time, I felt free, because the truth always finds a way to the surface. And sometimes, the only way to truly free yourself is to expose it, no matter the cost. So now I ask you, if you were in my shoes, would you stay silent, or would you bring everything into the light? Comment below. I want to hear what you'd do.